Hello English language learners around the world. A lot of students have asked me questions about this topic. So today we're talking about the top 10 mistakes students make when they're studying English. So let's start our countdown with mistake number 1, studying without a plan or a reason. If you've watched my other videos, you know how important it is to have a study plan and reason for studying English. The majority of students who aren't making progress get stuck because they're practicing English just here and there, whenever they have time, but there's no focus to it. Now don't get me wrong, some students without a study plan can speak well, and they can speak at a comfortable pace. But what happens is their English will go up a bit and then it just stays like this. That's because they reach a point where they're comfortable and then the learning stops. This is why it's so important to have a study plan that you continue to review month after month with updated goals. There are also students who want to know why they're not improving. And when I ask them what their reason is, there's a silent pause. It seems like a good idea. My dad told me to learn English. These aren't very good reasons for studying English. And if you don't have a good reason, you're not going to be motivated. Now that doesn't mean that you should just stop studying just because you don't have a good reason. What you should do is think about why learning English is important. If you need it for school or work, this is a really good reason. But let's say you really like movies. You can find a reason and say, I'm really passionate about English movies and I want to watch and understand them without having to translate. This is a reason that will help you stay motivated. So this is the first mistake, and it's definitely a big reason why many students don't progress in English. Next up is mistake number 2, which is being afraid of making mistakes. When you're new to a language, it's completely normal to feel shy and be scared of speaking. But learning a new language is like becoming a kid again, so we need to make mistakes. In fact, in some ways, making a mistake is a good thing, because it means that you're challenging your brain and you're learning something new. Imagine if I were to teach you the alphabet every day for a year. You would definitely know your ABCs and you wouldn't make any mistakes. But you would only know how to say ABC and you're definitely not learning. Now this doesn't mean that you should make mistakes on purpose, but you shouldn't look at mistakes as a bad thing. Even if you make the same mistake 100 times and someone corrects you, don't feel ashamed or upset with yourself. Just look at mistakes as a learning process. And one day, you won't even notice when you stop making that mistake and start speaking naturally. Our next mistake, mistake number 3, is something that everyone feels at some point in time, and that is believing you have some kind of weakness. When I ask students or people in general about the language they're studying, they'll say, I've been studying English for a while now, but I'm really bad. Or they'll say, I'm really bad with grammar. My brain just doesn't understand grammar. Students often believe they have some kind of weakness. Of course, we all have natural strengths and weaknesses. And when you study with other people, some students will learn things very quickly and others will take a little more time. But this doesn't mean that you're completely bad at it. It just means that you need more practice. It's also a very bad habit to tell yourself, I'm no good at pronunciation or I'm really bad at grammar. Because then you really do start to believe that you're bad at these things, and you'll cripple your learning. If you're really passionate about learning English, you have to believe that you can and will be able to do it. Hard work always pays off, so overcome that challenge and stop telling yourself that you can't. This also ties into our next mistake, mistake number 4, which is trying to master one thing before you move on to the next. Especially with speaking, students often want to master everything before they try to speak to another person. Or they never show their writing to anyone because they want to make sure their writing is perfect. This is not an effective way to improve your English. If you remember from my study plan video, it's really important that you practice reading, writing, speaking, and listening at the same time. And like I said in mistake number 3, you shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes. Students who aren't afraid of making mistakes and practice all their skills right from day 1 learn much, much faster. Now, even if you're practicing everything, let's take a look at mistake number 5. Sticking to a certain thing even though it's boring. If you're a university student or you're studying for the IELTS or the TOEFL, sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to read material that isn't very exciting and you just have to continue studying it. But in general, if you're trying to improve your English overall, the material that you're studying should be fun and engaging. So many students force themselves to read old grammar books even though they're boring and dull. And then when I ask them, okay, what did you learn? Their response? If you're studying boring material, you're going to lose motivation really fast. There are a million different ways to study English, and you should find one that is fun, interesting, and engaging for you. Even if your friend said that they learned a lot from this certain book, that might have worked for them, but it might not work for you. When something really isn't working for you, whether it's reading, writing, listening, or speaking, don't be afraid to try something new until you find something that really works. Now this next mistake might sound like it contradicts the last one, but mistake number 6 is jumping around and switching material too much. Now for mistake number 5, I said don't be afraid to try something new. But this doesn't mean that you should always be switching to new things. If you look at my list of free resources, you'll see that I put a lot of different apps and websites. This isn't because I want you to use all of them at the same time. This is so you can find something that really works for you. It's important to switch if you really don't like a certain app, website, or book. But once you find something that works, you should really try to finish it all the way through. Trying new things can be fun and exciting, but it's important not to get addicted to trying new things. Jumping around too much can be the reason why you feel like you're not making any progress. Now, mistake number 7 is something that students struggle with a lot, and that is not speaking enough. Now, there are some students who are in a rare situation where they're surrounded by English speakers, they like speaking English, and they speak English all the time. Lucky for them, their English is going to improve really quickly. But for the majority of students, it's a real challenge to speak English every day. But if you really want to improve, you have to speak English every day. Even if that means you're speaking to yourself, which is a great way to practice. Thankfully, with the internet, there are lots of ways to find language partners online. If you can't find a language partner to speak with you every day, you should practice by reading books out loud, or speaking to yourself out loud to practice your speaking. Improving your speaking is like training a muscle. It's only going to improve if we practice that skill specifically. Now the next mistake is something that many students don't want to admit, but it's definitely something that they feel. And that is only wanting to practice with native speakers. Of course, speaking and studying with native speakers is an excellent way to improve your English. But that doesn't mean that you only have to speak and study with English native speakers. Students often ask me, will I learn bad English if I speak English with non-native speakers? And the answer is no, 100% no. You can improve your English speaking a lot just by practicing English with someone else who is also studying English. Remember, it's just like training a muscle. So even if you're practicing your English by speaking to non-native speakers, you're still training your brain to become more comfortable with English speaking. And if you're committed to improving your English, it's impossible to learn something wrong that will stay with you forever. Imagine you're learning math and you learn that 1 + 1 is 2. And then your friend says 2 + 2 is 3. So you say, okay, I'm not sure about that. Later on, you talk to another friend, and this other friend tells you that actually 2 + 2 is 4. Trust me, I'm a native math speaker. You learn from your mistake, and you can actually help your old friend by correcting them and telling them that actually 2 + 2 is 4. The same thing works for English. I've met a lot of students who only want to practice their speaking with native speakers, and they actually make excuses or avoid practicing with other students because they're afraid they'll learn English wrong. But this is not an efficient way to learn English. You should practice with as many people as possible. The reality is there are millions of different English speakers around the world, all with different accents, expressions, and slang, so you want to practice with all of them. And sometimes non-native speakers can give you tips the native speakers don't think about. Speaking of native speakers, mistake number 9 is getting frustrated when you don't understand native speakers. Whether this happens when you're watching a movie or speaking to someone in person, it's completely normal if you have a hard time listening to native speakers. Our native languages are full of expressions and slang, so what you hear in the movies and on the streets is going to be completely different from what you read or study in your study material. I know this can be discouraging because sometimes you start to make some progress and you start to feel like, okay, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. And then you watch an English movie or you go to a restaurant with some English friends and then you feel like you can't understand anything. It's completely normal. If you're watching a regular English movie, it's normal if you only understand about 20%. But for most people, it's actually less than that. I know this doesn't really seem helpful to hear that it's normal you're having a hard time. But remember, everyone has to start somewhere, so this is where you are. Instead of getting frustrated, look at it as a challenge and use that to push you to try and improve more. Our last mistake also has to do with native speakers, and that is getting frustrated when native speakers don't understand you. Unless you're speaking to an English teacher like me, or someone who's learned a second language, most people don't know how to speak to second language learners. Most people are only familiar with the specific sounds that they make when they're speaking. This is why some people have a hard time understanding accents, especially if they've never heard that accent before. You might be trying to say a simple word like bag, but because you're nervous and stressed, you accidentally say bog. And it sounds like a small difference to you, but it's a completely different word for the other person. What ends up happening most of the time is that students get stressed, they stop speaking, they tell themselves that they don't know the word, and these days, when we get nervous, it's much easier to grab your smartphone, use Google Translate, and communicate like that. Now this works if you're in an emergency, but this isn't really a good way to communicate and improve your communication. When you're learning English at first, you have to get used to people saying, "Huh? What? Sorry, can you repeat that?" When this happens, don't get frustrated or stressed. Just try to speak as slowly and as clearly as possible. And even if you don't know the word at first, you can try to describe it or use gestures. It might feel embarrassing, but you shouldn't let that stop you from speaking with native speakers. And like I said before, if you're not afraid of making mistakes, you'll learn much faster. So there you have it, the top 10 biggest mistakes that students make when they're studying English. I know some of these mistakes are harder than others to overcome. But before you can actually do something, you have to believe that you can do it. So at the end of this video, I want you to start believing that you can overcome these mistakes. So guys, I want to know, which of these mistakes have you made before? You can share them in the comments below and tell me about it. If you have a friend who's making one of these mistakes, make sure to share this video with them. And if you like the video, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss my next video. Bye for now, I'll see you in the next video.